Hey everyone, Emmerron here. So, this week on How to GM, I wanted to talk about a little bit of a lighter aspect of GMing and kind of our role at the table. So, we've talked before about session zero and prepping players and the role that we have in kind of running that. So, in spirit of that, I wanted to discuss an idea that I have recently gained a little more appreciation for, which is as GMs, we are expected to know how to make characters and how to guide our players through that character creation process. So, a brief story time about why I wanted to talk about this as opposed to other GM topics that may have some impact at your table, because I feel like this one is probably really good for those GMs out there who are just getting off the ground. Maybe you're just running your first ever gig, or you're running a one shot for a group and you're not really sure how to help them bring characters into the world. So we're going to talk through the methods of character creation today and what benefit that they have for you as a GM guiding new players through the process of making a character in Cyberpunk Red. So again, story time real quick to kind of talk about why this topic as opposed to any others. It is currently Friday night and I needed a topic. So this one seemed appropriate given some of the stuff that's happened over the last week here personally for me. So last weekend, I went over to my friend Connor's house and he wanted to prep us for a game of The Witcher, which is another tabletop RPG that Artel Saurian Games makes. And one of the largest issues that I found myself encountering in making a character in The Witcher is the fact that everything about making a character was point buy. It was as though we have to make a complete package character in that game. And I've never played it before, so I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea where to start. And there are elements of that game's character creation system that do aid in that process a little bit, but in some ways it makes it a little more difficult than easy. And so to kind of explain what I mean by that, think if in Cyberpunk Red, if you're playing a solo, the game's rules forced you to pick a particular set of skills that solos benefited from. So say, for example, it forced you to take, at least a level in each of like heavy weapons, shoulder arms, handguns, evasion, brawling. We could expand that list further, but let's just say that you need to spend at least 1 point of your skill points in each of those, and that you were given a dedicated pool of skill points, which had to be spent on those skills and could not be spent on any others. And then you were given a second point, and then you were also given a second pool of points, which you could not spend on any of the solo skills, but could put toward any other skills you wanted to augment your character with. So, as you might imagine, this is already sounding way more complicated, and it's made a little bit more problematic when I, as a player, didn't know the game. And so this, I think, highlights an important reason why, even though to a seasoned gamer, you may not see value in the streetrat or the edgerunner creation methods for characters, I'm here to explain to you today why those are such great things for your table, especially if you're new or your friends are not familiar with Cyberpunk Red. So let's talk through what are the methods of character creation in Cyberpunk Red. So for those of you who are maybe just skimming the rulebook for the elements of the book that are critically important to you as the GM trying to put things together, like the difficulty value tables for combat or the gear, or you might be looking through the scream sheets at the back of the book and getting an idea for what you want to do in terms of which of those scream sheets you're running as your first one-shot gig, or maybe you're reading through a bunch of the DLC on the website and examining that as your introduction to the game. All of these are good methods. These are great places to start. But as such, it's a big book. It's 450 some odd pages, I think. So you're bound to miss some things on your first pass, and that's why I'm here to help. So let's talk through the character creation methods. So you have 3. You have streetrat, you have edgerunner, and you have complete package. So let's talk about what each of these is and what it represents when you're walking a player through that process. So let's talk through the different methods of character creation. So the first 2 are the ones that I think seasoned RPG players are going to look at, and they're maybe going to see a reduced value to them. I know when I first started playing Cyberpunk Red, I did not want to play with a pre-generated character. I wanted to make something that I would be happy with. And heedless of the fact that this could leave me in a really bad position in terms of certain skills, I didn't care. So you as the GM may have a better experience with your players if you encourage them to look at these, at the very least as a guide point, because I think that you can make a pretty competent character complete package even as a novice player, but these methods and the tables that they give us to examine are going to serve as a decent baseline and guidepost for doing something wider beyond that. So the common threads of a streetrat and an edgerunner are: we pick a role, which is pretty obvious. You pick one of the 10 roles in the game. You set the roll ability to 4, and then you run a life path. So we've already talked about creating more meaningful life paths. I'll try to link that video up here so that way you can have a look at that if you have not already seen that video. Once we have our life path figured out, we then roll stats. So the way that we roll stats for a streetrat and an edgerunner is similar but a little different. Edgerunners mainly just roll more dice. So each streetrat character role has a D10 table with a stat array running right to left, each column representing a stat. So what this does is you roll the D10 and you just take that line straight across. So it is really fast. You literally roll 1 dice, look at what that row is, and fill that in on your character sheet. The only difference with edgerunners is they do that once per column. So they'll roll 10 D10s, 1 for each stat, and they'll, look down each column as they're rolling. This gives you a little bit of like a more traditional D&D kind of feel to your game when you are rolling dice and trying to like come up with the best stats for your character. So if someone's coming from D&D and they really want to roll dice for their stats, I might encourage them to try edgerunner because it is going to be probably the most familiar to them comparatively, if we're talking like apples to oranges, because it's still not exactly the same, but it's about as close as we're going to get. You also will pick a cultural origin language and make sure that that gets set to 4 before anything else, because our skills will not account for that origin language in the next step here. So we're going to calculate our derived statistics. These are things like humanity, HP, as well as I believe, what was the other derived statistic? So yeah, we have HP and we have humanity. Those are the only ones. Okay, good. So HP and humanity, there's a table for calculating HP. It's a little wonky. I'm not going to explain the formula here. And your humanity is just 10 times your empathy. This will be important later. I would always encourage, if your players are trying to point by, do encourage them not to minimize their empathy, especially if you know they're going to want to experiment with cyberware. Make sure you emphasize to them, hey, the more cyberware you put in, the lower this score gets, and if it ever drops below 0, you are gone. Your character is effectively dead. There is very little that can be done for them at that point. unless your party really wants to keep them alive. I get your sheet. I play the worst version of yourself in the meanest possible way. So make sure they're aware of the consequence of having a low empathy character. Again, none of the role tables should set them up for failure there. So if they're a street rat or an edge runner, this is probably not a conversation you need to worry about having. But if they're doing the guidepost idea I came up with before, it's always good to remind them of the things that matter most, especially for combat-centric roles or roles that lean very heavily into hit points. These being ones like solo or netrunner. Those especially, you want to make sure they are aware that their health matters more than it would on other roles, because they are going to very likely be in one form or another constantly taking damage. Netrunners, because they'll absorb hits straight to the brain through the net, so they need a deeper HP pool to sustain that. And solos, obviously, they're your frontliners, so like they are more likely to get hit, and the targets that they're usually going to pick, the enemies are going to pick, are usually going to be prioritized among those people doing the most damage, which conveniently is where the solo usually will land. So once we've got those figured out, at that point, then we're going to be talking about skills. So the street rat skills are entirely predetermined. They are picked for you according to your role. There is no customization whatsoever with them. And this, again, is not a bad thing. There's a lot of skills in the game. And if your players are coming from a game system like, for example, D&D, is probably, again, I've said it before on this series and on this channel, D&D is the most common game I think a lot of people are going to come from to Cyberpunk Red, and so it's the one I emphasize the most for those of you who are coming over. So this is going to help because Cyberpunk is obviously a much more skill-intensive game. And what I mean by that is that in D&D, your skills aren't all your character can do. It's like all of the supplementary supporting kind of things your character can do for the most part. But when it comes to like combat, you've got other traits and resolutions that you use on a D&D character sheet to determine how good, bad, etc. you are at using a weapon or a skill or whatever, right? So when it comes to Cyberpunk, everything is codified as skills. This means everything that normally would be handled under like feats or traits or like mastery kind of stuff, that is all handled under skills. It is not separate. So D&D characters are typically going to look at their skills and say, okay, well, like, what are the supporting stuff I want to be good at? And I made this error as a new Cyberpunk player when I first learned the game. I didn't realize how important and necessary it was going to be to put a lot of points into a weapon skill, because it doesn't say it's needed, right? Like, it's not one of the bolded skills that you have to take points into. But this is a common mistake made by new Cyberpunk Red players, is they are going to look at that and say, well, I could still shoot a weapon or, you know, swing something or punch. Like, I can do that. That's not a skill. In this game, it is. So that's a capability that your player is going to be severely lacking if they overlook that. So that is the first thing here that is helpful. It's going to emphasize where things are needed for each of the roles. So again, even if we're guideposting off of this, this really shows like what the written weight for a set of skills that has been predetermined for a character of a particular role is going to be looking like, essentially. The next way of doing it is going to be edgerunner, obviously. So with an edgerunner, you are going to look at your role and it's going to have a list. So this is kind of similar to what I described The Witcher as, except they pool all your skill points together. So instead of it being a case of like, you have to take 1 point each of these skills and like you can use this pool of points to put as many as you want in supplementary skills that aren't there, this just combines them. So you have 86 skill points, much like a full package character, but all you're given is a list of the skills that you have to pick between. So it kind of narrows your vision a little bit and blinds you off of some of the stuff that a player in their head might think, oh, that looks really good, or that could have some utility, or there could be like a niche use case for this one thing, like photography on a solo, right? Like maybe I want to capture an image of the guy we're going after. Great. But the solo as a role is very commonly not going to be using photography, right? Like that's not something that reinforces our role as a weapons specialist or a combat specialist. It's secondary in a big way. And if a player puts too many points in that, thinking about the one niche use case and diving down that rabbit hole, they're gonna have a problem, or they're going to be missing points out of something and not realizing it until it's too late that that's missing. So this is going to help kind of narrow down like and show a player what is important. And obviously you've got the bolded skills here where you have to put at least 2 points in each of those. So in general, the way that the book talks about it is there's 20 skills in each of the lists. And again, I'm not going to put them in the video. You have to have the core rule book for this. But it says that you can approximately break it down to about 4 points per skill that's on the list. And so you can kind of do the math and then see kind of, okay, are there any remaining points left over or whatever? And then allocate those as you want or rebalance at that point. But it's always good to know kind of like, this is where you're starting from, and then just do a tweak. Because then you're not really thinking until you hit that second step as to like how you want the weights balanced. You just know, okay, I've got 4 in everything to start with, and we can push them up or down as we need to, as long as the bolded ones don't drop below 2. Easy. Like that's easy for anyone to follow. And even if you're new to the system, like this is going to help, again, kind of show you what's important and guide you along that path and make it so it's less confusing. So now that we've got all of that figured out, the next step is your weapons and your armor. So with edgerunners and your street rats, you are going to get a kit that is, again, pre-selected for you. You also get 500 eddies that you can spend discretionarily. So you get whatever's in your kit and 500 eddies, and that's what you start with. So some of these kits are going to have optional choices. So an example of this would be that you get either a shotgun or an assault rifle, and then you get options for the ammo. You know, obviously you're probably going to pick the ammo that's going to correspond to the gun you're using. Anything else would be really goofy. But the idea there is that, yeah, you're picking an option and then you get like the kit that comes with it, essentially. And so this lets you do a little customization, because then you can say, okay, well, like, do I want to be up close? Do I want to be further back? Because a shotgun and an assault rifle operate differently. And so you can pick for yourself, like, which way do I want to lean? And your skills are already going to support whatever's listing here, because that's all been pre-planned for you, especially if you're a street rat. If you're an edge runner, you might go back and tweak your skills a little more after seeing what your kit is. But again, that's no big deal because of the way they've simplified this. So we go through that, putting everything down, and then you can show your characters a list, or your players rather, a list of the available gear, cyberware, weapons, and they can kind of pick up anything supplementary to their starting kit that they want to, whether that's extra rations, spray paint, if they want to get some chrome, they can. There are some cheaper options, such as Cyber Eyes, that only cost like 100 eddies. So like there are some options for them to then further customize their character. And this doesn't get into fashion either. That's a really important thing to note. Fashion wear is a whole separate thing, which they are able to kind of pick afterward. So your outfit and gear are largely decided for you. But again, this is something where you, the GM, can kind of pick and choose. Because there is something cool in the fact that if the kit that the book picks for your character's fashion doesn't align with a player's vision of their character, I would encourage you just use the complete package rules for it. Say, all right, if you don't want what is on your opening fashion wear or your opening clothing, then we can scratch all of that. You get 800 eddies, use it or lose it to spend on fashion wear items and fashion cyberware. And then just give the player the guide and have them walk through it. Now, this is something that I've noticed get mentioned on Reddit somewhat recently. If you or your players or both are having a hard time deciding, what does bag lady chic mean in terms of fashion? What is urban flash? What is Asia pop? Like, some of those words might make sense to you if you think about it long enough or think about it a certain way. But I guarantee you, just like I did, you're going to have at least one of these things that you're going to have to like stop, think, and your thinking's not going to be enough to wonder, what does that look like? And really imagine that out. So to their immense credit, Artelsorian has in one of the free supplement DLCs for Black Chrome, in Black Chrome Plus, they actually have pictures for all of the fashion styles. So if you or your players are having a hard time imagining what a particular style looks like, you can look there. There are also 3-letter descriptions in the book that kind of describe the general sense that that fashion style would evoke in the passersby that see you. But I find that that doesn't quite do enough, at least to me, who's more visual, to really narrow that down in a helpful way. So what I would encourage you to do is download Black Chrome Plus. It's free off the Artelsorian website. I'll try to link to that in the description below if I remember. And look through that fashion kind of visual guide with your players, and then they can kind of pick for themselves, what do they want their edgerunner to look like? Because that's a big part of this game. Style over substance, right? We always want to look good doing whatever we're doing, regardless of what we're doing, so that's kind of the next thing. So the very last step is lifestyle and housing, and this applies to all players. So the book makes some assumptions here, and you're welcome to do as you will for your players at this point. If they have extra eds or they want some extra eds at the start, this is one creative way that we can kind of tweak the rules as written in the book and not have it be completely detrimental, in my opinion. So one thing that you can do is, if your players want housing in a, less costly place, like the assumption the book goes with is the following. All players start in a cargo container somewhere, which is 1,000 eddies a month, and they start on kibble as a lifestyle, which is 100 eddies a month. And this is the part where I'm going to tell you that if you have any interest in running the game as a long form campaign, there is a second book that I would say is not necessary, but highly recommended that you pick up as soon as possible, which is Black Chrome. And the reason that I mention this is that the economics of the game and lifestyle in a more comprehensive way is actually covered in a chapter in the back of Black Chrome. And unfortunately, this is in the paid book, so you won't see it in Black Chrome Plus. You do need to buy the full book. That is a worthwhile expense in my opinion. I think Black Chrome is an incredibly useful book. It has a ton of extra gear. It's got a bunch of vehicles that are, kind of sorely lacking in the core rule book. So getting those expanded bits of information and the stats and things like that, and kind of seeing the creative ways that that book kind of reshapes things. Nomads in particular, if you have a nomad at your table, really benefit from you, the GM, having a copy of Black Chrome at your disposal, because every vehicle in Black Chrome is corresponded with a nomad access number. This means that a nomad who is of that rank or lower when they rank up, or at the start when they make their character, they can pick that vehicle and take it along with any upgrades that it comes stock with as their vehicle of choice for that level up. So it's very, very good for them, especially. It expands them so greatly beyond just being like one vehicle with a bunch of the upgrades they choose. They can now instead pick maybe a bike, right? That is like their vehicle that they ride in and out of the city on. And then they have a family owned like Gertie or something like that, right? Where it's going to be something where like they can fit the whole party in it, and it's got a bunch of upgrades stock with it. So when they go, or Grundy, that's the word I was thinking of. It's a lovely abomination. You're going to love it if you see it in Black Chrome. But if they have something like this that has a bunch of upgrades just kind of built into it by stock, it's going to give them a better sense of like, I have something useful that they don't need to think about. Again, this is all in service of reducing the thought load of a new, inexperienced player as they come into the game, right? So any of these aids are going to be really, really helpful for that. So beyond that, so let's talk about that skewing. I got a little off topic, but lifestyle is separated into a bunch of different tiers. So lifestyle is going to be kibble, pre-pack, which is generic pre-pack is the next level, good pre-pack, and fresh food. So each of these is more expensive than the last, but if your players want to start with some of the perks of an increased lifestyle, they can do that, provided they have the eddies. Another option they may want to consider that is kind of dovetailed in here and isn't really described in the gear listing is they could pay for a trauma team subscription, which is a monthly cost. It costs 500 eddies for the silver tier and 1,000 for the premium tier. So if they do that, you can look at the trauma team chapter for like a comprehensive discussion of benefits of that. But I picked that for one of my characters that I played, and it was a lifesaver. It could do some crazy things. And even though it's an extra cost they need to kind of account for month to month, much like their lifestyle and their housing, it does give them some pretty neat perks, and it's not something that they might be aware they can add. So this is me as a GM telling you as a aspiring or current GM, make them aware of it, because like that is incredibly useful. And if they see value in it, they can just get a card and now they can call trauma team, and they can't abuse it, but it is there, right? So definitely look at that in the trauma team chapter, read up on what they get as a benefit for each tier, but recognize it is a monthly cost. So when they pay their housing and their lifestyle costs at the start of every month, they will pay for that as well. I also have them pay for their first month out of pocket at character creation if they want to do this. So whereas lifestyle and housing costs are assumed covered for that first month. Trauma Team is a charge against what they start with, essentially. So if you had a Street Rat or a Edgerunner character, the 500 eddies that they get could just be wholly spent, making them zeroed out broke to pay for Trauma Team if they wanted to. And that's how I do it at my table. You can do it as you want to, but this is the balanced way, I think. And if they decide, so let's talk about the housing, right? So they start at Kibble, which is 100 eddies a month. If they go above that, they have to pay the difference. Again, I'm not going to talk about that here. I do encourage you to buy the core rulebook to look at what that cost looks like. But in essence, if they are upgrading, they'll pay the difference out of pocket for whatever they would start at with Kibble, which is that 100 eddies a month, versus, the generic good pre-pack or fresh food. And some of those might be more challenging to pay for at character creation than others. I will just say that. With housing then, the cargo container costs you 1,000 eddies a month. Now, there is a housing option cheaper than this, and it actually could be a net benefit because cube hotels cost 500 a month, and some of the cube hotels within the city are actually in pretty nice neighborhoods. Watson in particular is like an upcoming development in the city, and they've got at least one cube hotel that is very nice. And so it's kind of like you can bring it up to your players if you feel like going down that rabbit hole a little bit. There is a DLC called Cargo Containers and Cube Hotels. Again, I will try to link that down below in the description if you look for it. But it's free on the website. So again, this isn't something you'd have to pay for additional. And it tells you several communities. I think it's like 10 communities for each of cargo containers and cube hotels throughout this whole city, and it gives you a map of the city showing where they are located. So if you look at it with the core rulebook handy, you will be able to see, oh yeah, this cube hotel is right by, this nightclub, for example. And it might be like, oh, well, like my edgerunner loves that club, right? Because I live right next to it. So I'm always there. That's where I look for work. That's where I, unwind. I get my drinks. I, do my dancing there. Whatever. That gives you a little more that you can kind of build into this fresh character to like give them a place in the city right out the start. And it's, free to do. So if they decide to do that, where they go in a cube hotel as opposed to a cargo container, the difference is 500 eddies there. So that's an additional 500 eddies that presumably they would have in their back pocket. Now, this could get problematic for balance because that extra 500 eddies on the face of it doesn't sound like much. But consider that you need to, as a player, once the game starts, if you want to find anything worth 500 eddies or more, you need a fixer or a tech who can either make or find the item you're looking for. And that comes down to skill rolls. And that's where it's like, so it starts literally getting to be dicey whether you'll be able to find the thing or not. So if you're adding 500 eddies on to a Street Rat or an Edgerunner character at the start of the game because they've chosen to live in a cube hotel, well, now that's 1,000 eddies in their back pocket that they can spend. And that's something that, you could try. Your mileage may vary. We might need to, break that glass in case of power gaming, pull some hardened mooks out on them. But again, like, it's manageable. 500 eddies isn't going to break your game entirely, but it is going to open some interesting cans of worms if you take it out a little further than just the kind of the first gig. Beyond cargo containers, though, you start getting into things like con apps, full-on like apartments. You can go all the way up to like having a mansion in the game, which again is largely, I think, aspirational. It's typically not something that I would anticipate a player ever really being able to afford unless they go like all in saving their eddies so that they can afford it. but then they need to continue affording it, obviously. So like on a monthly basis, that's where it starts getting a little challenging. There is a list of services in the back of the book. One of them is buying your own apartment or cargo container outright. So like if you want to break away from paying rent, you could do this, but they cost a lot of money. Like even for the cheapest options, we're talking like tens of thousands of eddies. So if you are nickel and diming your players appropriately, that shouldn't be easy to do, right? And so again, until they get there, this is what they're stuck with. So again, if they want to have a better housing situation out of the gate and their role does not provide for one, execs, I'm looking at you, then they can pay the difference, right? Or get the difference back in their pocket if they go down the level like I talked about. Most of the time, I would encourage you to probably keep your players choosing between a cargo container or a cube hotel at the start of the game. I don't know that I would encourage them to fly beyond that. Mostly because it's, unless there's a good reason for them to have that added kind of premium housing, it gets wonky, right? It takes them out of the danger mostly, right? Where like they should be living pressured as an edgerunner in the dangerous parts of the city, at least at the start. And then they look to live in a better spot of the city as time goes on. If you want a good example of what this kind of looks like and you haven't already seen it, I encourage you to watch Cyberpunk Edgerunners. It does take place 30 years in the future compared to Red, but it does kind of showcase what I'm talking about, where David Martinez at the start of the series starts living in relative squalor in a tiny like one-room apartment, and by the end he's living much better. I'm not going to spoil beyond that, but he's living much better by the end of the series than he is at the beginning. So now that we've talked through all of that, we should have a pretty full-formed character. Again, if you need more help with life path, that would be where I'd check out my life path video. If you're concerned about economics in the game or how to handle that, we have that one as well. I linked to the life path one earlier, so up here now I should have the economics one that I did earlier in the series, so you could refer back to that. But largely, I think that's going to do it for this week's episode. I feel like I've given a pretty comprehensive look at character creation and why this is important. And I think to reinforce one last thing here before we really close, street rat characters are so easy to roll up that you can just have them ready, right? You, as the GM, if you were approaching a group of players who like never played the game before, you could just bring a sheet per role and just say, okay, cool. Here are all the roles that are available in the game. Pick the one you want to play. And you could explain kind of the basics of each one to the players and have them roll the life path out so that they know kind of where they stand in the city. But beyond that, they can just take what you've rolled for them stat and gear wise and play. And I think that's powerful as hell. There is another supplement that I would encourage you to look at as well if you are interested in doing something like that, which is the one-shot pack. And I'll, again, try to link that down in the description so that you can look at that. But it's a series of one sheet characters that are already rolled up for your player to just take and run and just play with it. And you roll a life path like normal, but beyond that, you've got a character. It's beautiful. So this is a good way to like already pre-make a character so your players at the table have something to play right as you start the game, and then they don't need to worry about that added step of like, how do I make a solo that is effective at what they do, or a netrunner, especially netrunner, effective at what they do. You will already have it ready for them. So yeah, beyond that though, I think that's going to do it. If you have any suggestions about additional topics along this subject that you would like to see me explore, either in shorts or in a future video, definitely suggest those down in the comments, or if you're seeing this on Reddit, definitely suggest it in the Reddit comments as well. I did a short after last week's episode based on something that one of the Reddit commenters did suggest. So I would definitely encourage any of you out there who want to give me that feedback or suggest a topic that you want to see explored to do exactly that. I love that feedback. It makes my job easier, and it lets me know what you all want to see and learn more about, which is great as someone who is trying to educate on a topic. So beyond that, that's going to do it for us this week. Again, my name is Emmerron. Please like and subscribe if you think I have earned it. And regardless of where you are in the world, I hope you have a wonderful morning, evening, or afternoon. I hope you stay healthy, stay safe, and until we see each other again, peace.